Welcome to my Warp Live podcast, episode 12. Tony, we're on 12.
Wow! What's up, Kevin? We're here. 12.
That's what means we've almost been doing this for 6 months.
Oh, isn't that? I think it's exciting.
It's kind of cool that we've been able to pull up these stories. And, we're drifted towards the end of the summer and our big live event that you've been wanting to do for a while.
It's kind of flown by for me. It's fast.
It has been. And I think this is kind of like still the profile. This episode's about kind of profiling another person. We did Brian in the last one. This is going to be an episode about Kate Truscott, who grew up kind of in her professional career with the Warp Tour. And we're going to be covering our Give Back Days, which became a big part of what we did every year on the Warp Tour. We'll be talking about those. And that started around Hurricane Rita and Katrina. And then we're going to focus on a nonprofit I came across. Now, this nonprofit wasn't so much involved with maybe Warp Tour or any of my other projects. This came a little later on. It was created by a guy named Chris Bullard, and who really recognized through some of his own life some of the needs for mental health. So he created a thing called Sound Mind Live. And when I got to meet him, it was like, he gets shit done. Like, he just does. Like, he's unafraid to call bands. He gets people involved. And that's how, sometimes I think I even have a hard time sometimes calling a band to like be on this. Hey, might that be too much to ask? But man, he's fearless. And he put together some great shows recently, one up in Ventura, California, with Fits in the Tantrums and All Time Low.
Love that band.
Some of my students got to go up and work with him. So I thought it really great to bring in Chris Bullard and Sound Mind Live today to close out our charity thing.
Right, I'm excited about this show with Kate and the last one we did too. It's interesting to see how these people came up through their careers through the Warp Tour and where they are now. And to hear the entire story of how it's going, I know there's a lot of ups and downs and different things that she had to deal with.
We're going to have quite a few guests on this show. I talked to a lot of people. We're going to talk to Andy Lee. I don't think we're going to go too deep into his tattoo story with Kate, but
I want to hear about the tattoo story with Kate.
I think we'll touch on
gossip.
that. But
we want gossip. Kevin.
Charlie Griggs, who was also on the tour. Jim Carroccio, who I met, he was the road manager for bands like 311, and I actually worked back in the venues like Deftones and people like that.
Cool.
John Klucharitis, and Kelly McCarthy, who worked out on the tour. They're going to come in. But, before I met Kate, she actually had a life before that.
I grew up in the 90s. So pop culture was like really having a moment. Like TRL was the biggest thing in the world. And, reality TV was just kind of getting started. But pop culture was like really taking over the world at that time. And I wanted to work. I thought at the time I wanted to work for MTV because that was all I knew. I went to high school in northern Maine and, I just didn't know other things that were available. So it wasn't necessarily the music industry, but it was really like being involved in pop culture in some way that I wanted. So I went to college and there's sort of a comedy of errors that happened, but ultimately I had an advisor that said, you're in the wrong major. Don't worry about it. Just go get an internship. And I was like, okay.
Were you that internship?
No, we're not that internship. We're talking northern Maine.
Yeah.
There's
nothing
not a lot of opportunity there. But it turned out that she had a little bit of a connection and someone that was trying to actually build a scene up in northern Maine.
The guy I went to high school with has built an amphitheater there, and there's a little bit more happening. But at the time, there was nothing. Like, you had to go down to Boston really to see anything. And that was like easily a 5 or 6 hour drive from where we lived. So, yeah. So I worked at a venue in college and learned how to put on a show. It was this venue called the Fox Theater. And I learned all the basic skills, how to wire a stage, how to load in, load out, all of the pieces that it takes to put a show together. And I got really lucky, and ultimately someone took me on tour.
It's like the Fox Theater in Pomona. There was these theaters built all across the country at the same time. And now many of them have been restored.
And they were all movie houses, right?
They were movie houses, and now they've all been restored into these beautiful, a lot of Fox theaters are
And,
open.
here in Los Angeles, the Orpheum, Broadway, those lay dormant for such a long time, but they're exploding. And across the country, this is great for venues.
We used to break into those theaters and do shows, There used to be like the porn theater, and then we'd rent the building next door to you, the Chili Peppers. And later on in life,
Really?
I got to work on the remodel of the Mayan Theater.
Oh, that's great.
I was involved with I worked for a guy named Sammy Chow.
The Mayan's a great venue. I've seen so many great bands in that place. But see, I didn't realize. So when I'm looking at Kate and she's explaining how she learned how to put on a show, I'm thinking she did it at college in the small little, the Fox Theater there. That's a big rock venue, right? So she was not, this is my Fisher Price, my first rock venue. She was in a proper spot learning how the ropes.
She wasn't the student center. She was doing shows, working in there. And I think, at that point, she kind of got recognized to maybe go on the road.
I had gotten it in my head that I never wanted to do merch. I didn't want to do merchandise because I didn't want to get stuck there. I didn't want to just be the merch girl. I wanted to do something bigger. But after that tour, I knew that I had to take whatever job was offered to me, because the band was going to come around for another tour in a few months, and they were going to call me back and want to hire me back. And I had to have another job so that I could say no, because it was not a great experience, the first tour I ever went on. I was dating a guy at the time who was tour managing a band called Chevelle, and they needed a merchandise person. So I said, fine, I'll do it. And I did. And then Chevelle was being managed. The merchandise was being managed by a company called Band Merch. At the time was still privately owned by Don Delson and Brad Delson from Lincoln Park. Ultimately, they were bought by AEG. But at the time, I was doing a really great job on Chevelle. And so they pulled me off of Chevelle and put me with My Chemical Romance, who I had never heard of. I had no idea what Warped Tour was. I had no idea what Taste of Chaos was. And I remember my first day on Taste of Chaos in like San Jose or something. It was right at the end of the very first Taste of Chaos, and walking on that bus, and gigantic Chris Holland was our tour manager, and Big Worm was our security guy. And then I didn't really even know what like emo was. I had been with Chevelle, and we had been doing, arenas and big theaters, because we'd been doing like, opening up for Korn, or doing these big kind of like metal package tours. They were a big radio rock band at the time. And so I just wasn't really even aware of this other scene that was happening, because I was so much in my bubble. And then being a merchandise manager brought me to Taste of Chaos, which ultimately brought me to Warped.
She had mentioned earlier in there about pop culture and how TRL and things. And this was 2005 when, to be honest, it was like every kid was at home watching TRL. And TRL started grabbing onto these bands that I had kind of booked a year ahead of time.
Right.
Like I had My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy and some of these bands on the year before, and I saw that something was going on in music. Like the punk thing was okay, but this scene of music that would turn into emo was starting to happen. So I booked a lot of bands on the bet. I was paying these bands $500 a show the summer before. And then I gambled. I said, I'll give you $2,500. This is a year out. So 5 times the money come be on the Warped Tour the following summer.
Right on.
I had also decided that we would start another tour right then called Taste of Chaos. It became Taste of Chaos. It was like an indoor Warped Tour timed around the great hockey strike. So the arenas were cheap. We were able to get into the venues, an indoor Warped Tour, bring this kind of music indoors, go to places that we maybe didn't go to with Warped, and then it turned into places we also went with Warped. And it was just firing, like started to fire. Taste of Chaos, The Used. We were selling out arenas all over the place. Guy like me never went on tour in the wintertime because I was always working in the clubs. We're touring across, Canada in January and February.
Ouch!
Playing Saskatoon.
No.
Yeah, Winnipeg. No. Oh, yeah, Edmonton. Yeah, no problem. We can get there. It's only an 8-hour drive, but that would take us like 20 hours to get through the snow. But we did this tour, and then like that following summer was when it all just blew up. Like it was our biggest year, almost collapsed under its own success. It was such a big tour. And that's where I got to know Kate a bit out on Taste of Chaos, but we really got to see her in action on this tour.
2005, I believe we had 5 of the bands that were in the top 10 at radio at the time were on our tour. It was My Chem, Fall Out Boy, The Starting Line, All American Rejects, and somebody else.
The Offspring.
We're all on Warped at the same time.
And Avenged Sevenfold.
And Avenged Sevenfold, and Atreyu, and Dropkick. I mean, it was massive. And you booked those bands the year before. Like, you couldn't have known that From Under the Cork Tree was going to become this massive hit, and that My Chem was going to become these massive, massive hits. And it was very much like a fangirl thing. So the fact was that we were selling more merchandise than ever. Everyone was, but me specifically, we were doing anywhere between $10,000 and like $60,000 a day.
And you paid the band $2,500?
They didn't complain.
And we didn't take credit cards at the time. Like, I remember getting pulled over at the border in Canada, and basically they just said, like, the only reason that we're not stopping and like auditing you is because we don't want to take the time to count all the cash that's in your bus that we just found. It was like hidden in couch cushions and stuff. It was a lot. And it was just wild. Like, I used to have to stand on tables and shout at people to get them to back up because they were crushing in the table. Like, our merch tents they're just tents. And then there's like a table that kind of creates like a barrier between you and the crowd comes up to your table, ask you for things, you go back, you give them the thing, right? They were coming in so quickly that they were pushing the tables back and like crushing up on us. And I remember one show in Philadelphia, all of our merch tents were up against a fence. And then the two main stages were right. I mean, it couldn't have been more than 200 yards. It was close. It was really close. So when those bands went on, people were just crushing into our tents and like moshing each other, like throwing each other into the merch tents. And I remember standing on a table and like waving down security that was on the main stage, and they had to leave the stage and come out to the merch tents and push people back because it was getting really dangerous. And we were up against a fence, so we couldn't go anywhere. And the fence is up against like the train tracks. So there was nowhere for us to go. It was wild times.
Glad to hear you're creating safe environments for your employees.
Yeah, well, she wasn't my employee at that time. She was working for the band, but you think about it. So
you got to fight there.
It's one of those things, but eventually that's how many people ended up coming into like the Kevin Lyman fold, the Forfini fold.
Mm-hmm.
They would get recognized out there for their hard work working for someone else. So at that point, I had a great person working for me, Sarah Bear, who recognized a little bit of what was going on about with Kate.
I've heard this a million times before, where people that have worked on that tour were recognized because of the hard work that they put in a very hard working environment. This is a story that's being told over and over because it was you were on your toes, and there are a lot of people that stood out. This being one of them.
The second taste of chaos, you guys needed someone to run the label tent, so Jody hired me. And that's where I met you and Sarah and Lisa and everyone. And, Sarah very much took me under her wing and kind of gave me some advice and helped me move forward. And then Lisa hired me to work for her as the production assistant in the summertime. And then from there, Sarah hired me to help with sponsorship. Because I had already lived in Chicago and I had a little bit of a promotions background, and I basically just took instruction well.
All of a sudden she's now being put into this position where, okay, got to get out of the tent. You're not going to be in the tent all day long. You're going to start dealing with people in a different way. I thought it would be great. I caught up with a few people that had a lot of experience, and Andy Lee worked on many of my tours and is now living up in northern Michigan on the end of the Michigan. I don't know why he's all the way, but it's nice.
Up there, very cold.
It's very cold, but he was a great worker with us and had a lot of experience working with Kate.
First time I kind of met Kate was on Warped Tour, and she was a merch girl. And then the next year she was like Lisa's assistant, I think, and kind of did some office stuff. And then from there, it was like the following summer she was full time with you, and she's gone way up in the world. And a lot of people are like her, have done kind of the same thing. It's pretty cool how that all works out.
And the next person we're going to talk to is I said his full name, but like I keep reading his name, but I never knew him as anything more than either Eagle Scout or Birdie on the road. And like when I had this name, John Klucharitis, I'm going, who's John Klucharitis? And I'm still, when I looked at our notes today, I'm going, John Klucharitis. Gosh, I invented it. A Birdie or Eagle Scout. So let's check in with Birdie and Eagle Scout.
Kate is like my second mother. Even when like I talk to her now, I'm like, hey mom, like how are you? Like she's great. She really like took me under her wing and took care of me my first summer out there. That was the 2015 Warped Tour was my first tour ever. Like I'd never done anything remotely like it before. And she really took me under her wing and was like, oh no, like these are the people like you should be checking in with every day. Like if you have any issues, talk to me. Like, oh, what do you want to do in the industry? And I told her and she's like, okay, well, like go talk to, I told her like, I want to be a production manager and monitor guy. And she's like, oh, go talk to Tommy LBC from Rat, see if you can like hang out with some of his guys for a day. You want to be a production manager, go hang out with, like Brooklyn or Chris or Gary O or Kenny, like learn that aspect of like stage managing from them, like just all this stuff. She'd be like, oh, this is, camp, they're this band's road manager. Like you should talk to them, stuff like that. And so Kate, working with her was just phenomenal. And she's always just a hoot to work with.
He started out like as an intern, had a goal of being on Warped Tour, paid his dues, worked hard, and then all of a sudden, I mean, I just talked to him. He's like got tours stacked up for the next 2 years.
Oh, good for him.
So he's doing really great. And I, it was fun. When I put this out, I didn't know who I was going to hear back. And Kelly McCarthy was a young woman who came out on Warped Tour and kind of cut her teeth out there. And it was awesome to catch up with her.
Oh, she was my leader completely. She was my everything out there. She was my contact between Cool Gear and myself. If we needed extra boxes to come in, if we needed less boxes to come in, she was my go-to person out there. And she definitely took on like the mom role with my first year at Cool Gear and like gave me the hints and tips of how to really survive on Warped Tour and things like that. I would call her mom when I would see her.
We're kind of building a pattern here of the people that she was dealing with. And,
sure.
And then we had a road manager. Some of these seasoned road managers would come out. And if a road manager came into Warped Tour with a open mind, could be great. But, when you're not the center of attention, when you're one band of 60 or 80, and you're maybe been on the road for the last 20 years or 10, 15 years, all of a sudden you found that yourself in that parking lot. Some of these seasoned old crew people just didn't dig it too much, but Jim explains kind of like how he was made to feel out there.
She was brilliant. I mean, she was energetic and incredibly intelligent, and she was just one of those people you really like being around. And especially when you're on the Warped Tour, you try to like keep that positive influence. You don't want to be around people that are too bummed out all the time, So I loved Kate. I thought she was great. What I'm a big fan of, and I found with Kate was her ability to focus. She was on something. She was on it until it got done. And she had obviously a great work ethic, but she was able to keep her energy up and keep going. And on the Warped Tour, that's not easy to do. That as much fun as the Warped Tour was, and is it was like going on vacation with your friends without your parents for the first time. But that could be a very tough tour. Especially when the summers start getting hot, and the schedules are swap around quite a bit, and things can get pretty confusing, and it can get stressful. And Kate was always super focused and really, really positive and a really good person to be around all the time. And I never, through the whole tour, and I'm trying to think, I'm thinking I was 311, I was with her. But through the whole time, I never once, and I saw her every day. I worked with her every day. I never once ran into her where it wasn't a really positive, focused, business-like, but really good experience, really positive experience. I really love that about her. I always did.
And finally, we checked in with Charlie Griggs, who worked on the tour a few years, and he kind of summed up kind of the cruise experience with Kate.
The first time when Kate came by, I had no idea who she was. And I remember at that point, I'm one of those kind of people that I would just go introduce myself a lot of times to people. And she came in and I could just tell that she was somebody, she had like an aura to her that, she was somebody important on the tour. And she was also had that thing about her that if you know Kate, you kind of, you can see you don't want to piss her off. You know what I mean? She comes off very strong. But I remember going up to her and introducing myself. She goes, "Yeah, I know who you are already." And I was just like, okay, so that means she's paying attention to this very, very heavy. Like, you could tell it's something that she cared a lot about, the activations and everything with sponsorship. And she really was a no BS type person. And that's how I got introduced to Kate in a nutshell.
But the one thing that a lot of people realize is you don't want to piss Kate off. Like, one time she threw me in a chokehold. To get her point across, she literally almost choked me out in the middle of a parking lot. So,
Punk rock,
I'm
man.
sure I wasn't the only person that fell under the bad side of Kate once in a while. And Charlie had touched on a point there.
I don't think I've ever pissed Kate off. I have a funny story about someone pissing her off, which I tell to a lot of people, and she knows the story too. We were doing meet and greets with some of the major bands on the tour, and we were doing acoustic sets as well. We had a meet and greet one day come in, and I believe we were in Texas, so we had some of her family that came out, and she came by before and was like, "Can you make sure they're taken care of, and make sure they get to meet the band members and everything." And so she walked by at the beginning of this meet and greet, and one of the members from the band wasn't there. And I remember she came up to ask me, she's like, "Where's so-and-so?" And I was like, "Well, the tour manager said he wasn't feeling good and didn't want to get off the bus." And she goes, "I know he was partying last night. I'll be right back." So she walks back to the buses, and apparently he was in like a dead sleep, yanks him out of his bunk and drags him out to this meet and greet and makes him sit down and finish the meet and greet. So that's how I was like, I'm never going to piss this woman off. But the thing with Kate is I don't think I've ever done anything to piss her off, but I've always been out on that tour. It's one of those tours where everybody helps everybody. And I have a feeling that, with her, with anybody out there, that's the only way you really piss somebody off out there, is if you're not pulling your weight and you're not, doing what you're supposed to do out there and causing problems.
But at this point with her on the tour, what was her title, her position? It sounds like she was wrangling cats here a lot.
Running sponsorship and running the activations and out in the field such as that. And, I think a lot of people, the biggest problem sometimes, and it's addressed, is you have an attitude on the road. It's a road attitude. You were on tour. Everyone could be a little harsher. It's not taken personally. You just kind of think. But all of a sudden, Kate starts working full time for me, and we have to start transitioning to going to corporate meetings and sitting in boardrooms and learning that transition. And even Kate had some points about what she went through to transition, but she loves the road. She loves the road. But to kind of beyond that, to kind of work, she had to learn how to work in the office and put some time into that office.
Yes, I had to take that sort of assertion, aggression, whatever that I needed to function properly and be successful in the merchandise world and that festival world. I had to shift. And I'm really lucky that I had people like you and like Sarah that took me in and were willing to have patience with me just to really make that change. And I remember over time, I used to hear all the time, like, "Oh, you're really intimidating. You can be really scary, whatever." And that really hurt because I was working really hard at being professional and at my job and at taking care of people and like going above and beyond. So it was really hard to hear that. And so I had to actively work at making people more comfortable around me, which is probably a bigger issue in terms of like how people see women and whatever. But like for me, it was tough. It was a tough thing to hear, that people were afraid to come talk to me, knowing how hard I was working to try to help them and make their lives better and all of those things. But I'm so, so, so thankful that I had the experience and I had all those opportunities. I mean, you guys taking me on meetings, you didn't have to do that, but like to let me see how those things work. And I'm grateful that, like, you know, when I was a kid, my older brothers always told me to listen more than I talk, you know, and I'm a talker. So, like, you know, to just shut up sometimes and listen to what people are saying and kind of learn those things and be able to make those changes, be given the time and opportunity to make those changes. Not a lot of companies that would have given someone in my position the sort of breadth to do that.
When the pandemic hit, you know, we were coming out of the final year of Warped Tour. I kind of was like easing into things, teaching full time. But I had, you know, Kate and Kat and a few people working, and we were doing really good. We started to pick up a lot of consulting work. We were doing all kinds of things. And then in March, when the COVID hit, I was going through surgeries again. I was sitting there, trying to focus on teaching, you know, trying to stay like on point with what I had to do, that we had to conscientiously decide to wind down the Kevin Lyman group. Now I'm bringing people back for specific projects and everything. Sure. But we made sure that everyone ended up in great positions, and she's got a great position at the Mandolin, a company doing streaming, and she's working in that situation. So she just continues on her journey. But, you know, we talk at least once or twice. It was almost every day, and now we're talking once or twice a week. I can ask her because I can't find something in all our files, or she needs some help remembering that person. But, you know, you keep going, you know, and, you know, it was really nice because we look at people and look at their growth over time. It doesn't happen overnight for a lot. We work, and she's become quite a leader out there.
So when she was there for the years that were starting, there were some events that happened, and I don't know if I'm the right train here, but there were events that alluded to this nonprofit or new solution that you have on the tour. What were those events that happened? And what years were they? I mean, was some pretty horrible things in this country.
Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005.
Right.
And Rita hit pretty close right behind that.
Right.
So we had a very good year that year. It was like a Warped Tour. It was our crushing year, TRL, all these bands. And sure. Financially, it was a solid year. And Van's parent company, VF Holdings, which owns many companies, did a thing within that they'd do a matching fund. So if you donated money, they would match it to Katrina relief. Right. So we, as a partner group, decided that, hey, this is a good time for us to give back. It's a year that we did well. So we donated $300,000 to Katrina relief.
That's a lot.
And then they jumped.
Vans matched it?
And VF matched it.
That's
for the band.
$600K.
So we were able to hand them a check. I was able to build a house here for Habitat for Humanity myself. I donated money to build a house here.
Right on.
And I was really looking to kind of like, wow, how do we continue this kind of thing? We have a lot of people power out on Warped Tour.
Yep.
You know, we set up cities, we do things. So I looked at our routing and I go, wow, if we move one show here or there, we can have a day off in the New Orleans area to go down there and see if we can help Habitat for Humanity. And we'll talk a little bit about later, but, you know, what happened with Habitat for Humanity, because I really wasn't happy with it, some of the things that they did. But we found a great group in Cameron City Parish to volunteer our first time. So, you know, Kate can set up the thing and we'll fill in the blanks.
The first one I ever did was 2006. I was a production assistant in the production office, and we were, it was when we went to Cameron Parish in Louisiana. And I mean, I still have photos, hard photos back from when we used real cameras, of, you know, the NoFX guys and the Bouncing Souls guys and the Casualties, like, all on a school bus, just sweating our asses off, going to some site and digging holes and cleaning up debris and, like, you know, trying to help from, was it Hurricane Rita?
Yeah. Well, Katrina, well, they always say Katrina, but there was a second one that hit it called Rita, you know, I think, and hit an area called Cameron Parish.
Yeah. And then going to that church that we went to after, and the church ladies, sweet little old ladies making red beans and rice for all of these. Like, I don't think that since then we have had a more sort of intimidating to the outside world looking group of people. Like, you know, mohawks, tattoos, all black clothes. Like, we had everything. So we had like Avenged Sevenfold, all the like kind of classic punk guys again, like Bouncing Souls, NoFX, Against Me. We had all of them that year, and they all showed up, and it was a wild experience of sweet little church ladies serving us lunch. And it was so nice. And I remember kind of taking that moving forward and thinking like, you know, they needed help. We were ready to give it, and they accepted it with grace and with hospitality. And then moving forward, I mean, we did some really great projects. We did that project in Baltimore where we cleaned up a schoolyard that ultimately became like an urban garden, and like we ripped out all the concrete and they put grass in later. We painted a mural. I mean, and we did all of that inside of like 4 hours. When we came to Nashville and after the flood and worked with Hands On Nashville, we had 3 40-yard dumpsters, and they had to ask us to stop filling them because the city would not take them away, or the waste management company wouldn't take them away if they were too overfilled. And we were working so hard. Like it was one of the first times that the organizers came to us and said, we need you to stop. We didn't expect you to work this hard or this fast. We actually don't have any more work for you to do. And they let us go early because they didn't. And that has been a story I've told many times, because as we've organized events moving forward, we've always had to remind them, like, these are people that work. They're used to soccer teams and church groups, and like maybe a company is bringing people in and, you know, making them do it as a give back. Our people were there and they wanted to help, and then they wanted to go because they wanted their day off. And, you know, for us to go to our staff and say, hey, this is the job. You can leave when you're done. Like, I've never seen anything like it. I remember 2 of the dudes from Set Your Goals pulling a armchair that had been soaking in like a lazy boy that had been soaking in the river and in the mud, yanking it out of the mud and carrying it to a dumpster. And it took them forever, but they got it out, and it was very impressive. Those days were some of the most fun that we've had on the tour.
I remember that moment of these nice church ladies doing red beans and rice, and we worked really hard that day. But Andy Lee had his own memory.
It was the summer after Katrina hit, and I remember you coming up to me, or Lisa Bromley or somebody said, hey, we need to get a group of the more skilled guys together because we're going to do a volunteer day. And I was like, oh, this sounds good. And I'm like, where's this at? And it's like, well, it's going to be when we're in New Orleans. And I'm like, oh, man, because New Orleans is obviously one of the best days off. And, you know, everybody loves to go down and hang out in New Orleans. And I'm like, oh, man, this sucks. Like, we were looking forward to having the day off there. And she said, you know, it's going to be like a Katrina cleanup. And she goes, we have a family where the guy is building his house, and we want to get like setup guys and any of the other guys that have any carpentry skills or whatever, and the electricians, the cat power guys together. And we're going to, you know, it's going to be a great day. It's going to be a lot of fun, and you guys will have the best time out of anybody else, because a lot of the other people were just going, you know, they were going to go pick up trash and stuff like that. So I said, all right. So I honestly, I can't remember how many people we got together, but I think we had 2 or 3 runner vans full of guys. And we parked, all our buses were parked at, I want to say the football field, the college football field. It was a huge stadium. Yeah. So, you know, we wake up in the morning and there's all these buses, and we're at this big football or big parking lot. And it was already hot. So we load up into those runner vans and we're driving. And it's like, what did Kevin get us into now? Where the heck are we going? And we're driving through these swamps, and we're driving out to, the guy's name is Manny. I can't remember his last name, but as we're driving out there, you can see these little houses like miles out in the swamp and in the marsh. And it's like, it really set in then, like how devastating it was for these people. I mean, their houses literally floated a mile and a half out. So we pull up to Manny's house, and he had his family was there, and he was an older gentleman, probably close to retirement. And he had he had built his house up on stilts, and we got there, and he said, well, look out over there. And he points out across the road, and there's this little house kind of sitting out about a mile and a half out. And he goes, that house was sitting right where you guys are standing right now. So we were just like, oh my God. And we're like, all right, well, let's get going. So we were like, well, what do you need? What do you want to get done today? So we ended up, it was, the house was framed in, it was on stilts. We ended up wrapping the house in the Tyvek. We got the windows in for them. The electricians, they ran tons and tons of wire for them. And I think they got them pretty much all the way roughed in, if I remember right. We had got some siding up for them. And then some of the crew wasn't as skilled as others. So they helped out with his kids and grandkids, and they did some cleaning up around the property. And we spent, I'd say probably a good 8 to 10 hour day there. And we accomplished probably 2 weeks of work for that guy. And to see this guy at the end of that day with tears in his eyes, because he was so thrilled and so thankful that we were able to do this for him. And, it was really special, and I'll never, ever forget that day. And I'll never forget the look on his face, when we were saying our goodbyes. And of course, in Kevin fashion, at the end of the night, we had a huge cookout, like a Cajun barbecue and everything back at the parking lot. And we insisted he came, and he brought his whole family, and he brought some of his special sauce with him. And after a few drinks of his clear liquid, I don't recall much of the rest of the evening. So
I think sometimes we see it on TV, we become numb to this stuff.
That got me a little emotional,
But
I gotta say.
you went out there, and at that point, my wife, Fran came, and my daughters came, and they were very young at that point. And there was mosquitoes and bugs, and they were trying to help this guy. My wife asked this person, he said, well, why don't you move? Like, if the flood, and he looked and goes, this is home.
This is my house.
Where I grew up. This is where I grew up. And it really sunk in. But of course, the still worked. The moonshine came a-flowing that day in the parking lot with the Warped Tour. And a lot of memories for people.
So,
but that kicked us off to doing all these other events.
This is your first. You had a good year. Katrina hit. You gave $300,000. One, you got the bands to help out, which is great. I think that's amazing. I don't know how you did that, but you did. And then how did you keep it going?
Well, each summer we would look at the routing and find a place, because sadly there's a need everywhere for something. So, we sometimes that synced up with a disaster, and sometimes it just synced up with a need. So those needs sometimes could be like that we did with Monterey Bay. We got with the Aquarium Society. We were coming down from San Francisco to LA, and we had this day off. So we would go over to Monterey, and we helped clean an invasive seaweed species out of the bay. We did some sand dune restoration, and we would do an invasive species removal, plants.
Right.
Nothing like, and Warped was always about, like, give them a task and let them see the end result. So, this spun into like things like, Charlie talked a little bit about, Hurricane Sandy, which became a focal point for us for a while up on the East Coast.
I remember the very first one we did was the cleanup it was out in Jersey Shore. The day we were doing the cleanup for, I think it was Red, was the name of the nonprofit, I believe. We're at the fire station just cleaning up the whole town because what was the hurricane that came through? Was it
Sandy?
Sandy.
Yeah,
Sandy had came through and pretty much just destroyed the town, and it was just dirty, and we pretty much went out there. If I can remember everybody from, Ollie from Bring Me the Horizon to, the merch guy for the baby bands, everybody was out there pulling their weight just like everybody else was, and just helping clean up the town, which, was one of the coolest things about Warped Tour was, everybody was an equal to, a certain extent.
And they all jumped in. So you'd say just about everybody on the tour.
Not everybody. If we had it was about 50%, 60% of the people would come.
And as far as what Kate's role was for this portion of the Give Back Days,
Kate would have to organize all. We'd have to a lot of times we'd have to organize transportation, because the buses would come and we'd park and then have to take people out to work sites and job sites. We'd always try to order food from a local vendor.
Okay, that's cool.
We needed to bring our water stations that we would normally use for the audiences and crowd. We wanted to make sure we had water for everyone, and we didn't just want bottle. We had our refilling stations. So there was a lot of coordination. So not only are we doing like a 42 city tour in 56 days, there was this event that each year was like an anchor.
Right.
And one that I was really surprised. We did a couple where it was like, oh man, the Nashville floods were just. I mean, a whole like warehouse of sporting goods and washing machines got washed down a river, and we're dragging these things out where we filled up the trash cans. But one that seemed to have stuck in a couple people's minds, that I thought was really interesting, and it stuck in my mind too. And let's hear what John thought about Gettysburg.
And that's one of the ones that so my first summer I didn't really have like a clique or like a group to hang out with, and the setup guys really were like, no, like you come with us. Like, oh, what are you doing for setup day or for give back day? And I was like, I don't know yet. They're like, oh, come plant trees with us in Gettysburg. And I was like, okay, cool. I just remember like stepping off the bus and seeing just this like empty plot of land, and then at the end of the day, just seeing it filled with these trees that we had planted. And I was like, this is this is cool. Like this is really cool.
You have to explain this. What was the task? What was the issue? What happened to this area that needed trees planted? This wasn't the battleground.
Yeah, Gettysburg battlefield.
Oh,
the
no
Civil War
way!
battlefield.
That is awesome.
So they're trying to restore the battlefields to their original look and feel of what they were.
Yeah.
I think let's hear from Kelly, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about that day.
In 2016, it was actually in Gettysburg. I jumped on the tour a little bit late in that one, so I missed the first few days. And the community day was actually my first day on Warped Tour in 2016. I remember it. It was awesome. We were painting murals for a park. We were cleaning it up. It was awesome. A coworker of mine recently was there, and the mural is still up, and they sent me a picture of it.
Awesome.
Yeah, we had a graffiti artist with us, and I just ran into one of them down in San Diego at an event.
Oh, cool.
And they painted this mural, but it was like really strange because we went out that evening. We hired someone to take us on a tour to go look at the battlefield and how this all transpired. And I mean, it still kind of gives you the goosebumps. You're going through these battlefields and your cemeteries and
Sure.
places, and then they're pointing out and to think that they're working to restore these things. So it was also like an amazing, like the kind of thing you would maybe do on a summer vacation, like go to Gettysburg, go visit all of a sudden on the Warped Tour, we got all our buses, we're all there. Now, some people just went out to the local bars and had some fun that night.
Yeah, but what an education for a lot of these kids to be able to go out and do that.
It was mine. So we did that for a long time, and it was great. I encourage, and I know some bands like Rise Against have done some things on their own where they've donated days off to teach music at schools and things. I really think, I wish people would get in that mindset that you're bringing knowledge to a community, whether you're just a band of 4, 6, 8, you could do a little something on a day off to give back because we were so lucky to get to do what we did. But we were able to make an impact when we had, a crew of, 500, 600 people.
Absolutely. And the other thing, too, is that you started this in about 2006, 2005, and you took it all the way to the end of the tour. So that was, that's 12, 13 years of reinforcement to these people to do something like that. And hopefully it carries on.
Hopefully a few of them did.
So out of all of these, I mean, from 2005 to present day, which one sticks in your mind the most? What's your most favorite? Give Back Day.
Oh, gosh. I did really enjoy Monterey. Because I go back there, we drive through Monterey, and you can see how those trees you planted, we stop and look, and now those trees we planted, 10, 12 years ago, and now 15, 20 feet high. I do have to say for the Gettysburg, for my personal interest in the Civil War and what happened in this country, and having that day afterwards, to kind of, wow, the impactful, especially during this time when our country is torn apart in so many ways. Do we really want to go back to a point where we have big fields of dead people that were our brothers and family, neighbors? Really? I mean, I think every person should be forced to go and realize and look at those gravestones to see, do we really want that in this country? Especially with what's been going on in the past few months. It doesn't resonate with me as a positive.
We felt that divisiveness today and in these times, and we felt a change where it seems things are much calmer. But I really feel the complete tear in present day politics, the separation that is out there.
I mean,
I guess this is a real eye opener of what it could actually happen.
Yeah, we did for one of our future episodes. We did an interview where someone mentioned like smoking pot calmed everyone down in prison.
Yeah.
Maybe, like smoking pot in the Senate sessions would calm everyone down enough to relax and talk through things.
I think very insightful, and I think we should mandate that.
Could you imagine like McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene passing a joint with AOC and everyone? It'd be great.
It solves a lot of problems.
It would be. I think the give back days, that's what the memories have. The shows blend together sometimes. You remember those days you have. And to hear Andy to say it really changed his whole perspective when he would have been walking around Bourbon Street with one of those big hurricanes and glasses, anyone could be doing that. Other people were doing good. So, I asked Kate, did some of this stuff carry on in your life, doing some of this other stuff? And I asked her what she's involved in.
Now, I serve on the board of the Tennessee Alliance for Kids. We are an independent nonprofit association that supports the Middle Tennessee DCS offices. I'm sure, as you can imagine, the state isn't exactly pouring resources into the foster care system. So we do our best to support resources and financially the DCS offices so that they are able to both support kids that have been put into the system, keep kids from going into the system, and support kids that are aging out of the system. That one's really important to me right now. But all of that started with Warped because, you always treated our nonprofit partners as the same, the same as we treated sponsors. So that fell under my umbrella.
Let me understand. She was on tour and she was in the office and working, but when Warped Tour was not out for 3.5 months or whatever during the summertime, was she involved in the winter shows? Or was
she worked
in the office?
She worked in the office. She worked on events. We were always doing projects. But I asked Kate, and now she's probably moving into this more of an administrative role.
Mm-hmm.
Does she miss the road?
I miss it. I miss the people. But I think I'm all right with it. I turned 40 this year. I think it's probably time. But I am, my most proud moments are talking to the people that, were kids when they started with us, 19, 20 years old, people like Sierra, like Becca, like Ashley Osborne, like they were young kids just getting started in the world when they first came out on the road with us. And now, Becca does big deals, VIP tours, and Sierra's over at Veeps, and Ashley Osborne shot Kesha the other day. Like that's insane, and that is where I find the most pride in my years from the Warped Tour. But yes, I miss it, but I get my fix at festivals every year when I still get to work backstage at some of those. So.
Yeah. So, this kind of falls into my thing. A lot of people will argue this, but I say the first day you go on the road is the day you should start preparing to get off the road.
It makes a lot of sense.
I say, you start thinking about that after road life, and some people, it's not for everyone. And some people would argue, I want to be on the road forever. That's fine.
No.
But the majority of people eventually, and we're seeing that during this end of this pandemic, a lot of people saying, I'm not going back out on the road. It's been their first break from the road. There's another life out there. There's something else I can explore. But I always say prepare to get off the road at some point and try to make that transition as easy as possible. And even with myself, it was pretty easy because I went right into teaching. It was like,
it was
there
great.
was no lag time. I'm going to teaching now, filled up, and someone goes, well, what about, and I go, man, I filled up my time. I've got a lot, playing golf with you.
Yeah. And all this time during the pandemic, my wife has feverishly been trying to figure out how to get me back on the road.
Yeah. You've been dancing, you've been preparing. I know the other day you were playing piano until our friend Andre showed up.
That's right, baby.
You had to stop playing once Andre showed up.
Andre made me feel very
we had our friend Andre over here who's played at the White House. So,
so good.
It was so good. And that leads us, I'm proud of Kate. Good example and she is a good example for a lot of people on how you can start and work your way up and transition to other lines of work, doing different things. But, I ran into someone a while back and it was very impressive. he contacted me about after I did the 320 Mental Health Festival, and he says, I'm working on some similar projects, kind of things. Maybe we can collaborate. Maybe I can help. And I started hearing it. I go, you don't need any help. You're doing just fine.
Right.
But and recently, his name is Chris Bullard. He started a group called Sound Mind Live, and it was about mental health. And I asked him, like, you're pretty young. A lot of times you start a foundation a little later. And I asked him, like, you're young to have started this and be so like successful producing these shows and stuff. How'd you decide to do this?
Really, the founding of SoundMind came out of personal experience in my own journey. I mean, right out of college, I had experience as a musician. I was touring for a couple of years in a band. So, one, got to learn just how ridiculously difficult it is on your mental health just touring. You're on the road constantly and you're just not getting any sleep. And then after that, though, kind of in a year or so after, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I was going through a really difficult time and under a lot of stress. And I got the diagnosis. And, I grew up in a pretty open family, but it was still kind of shocking and not knowing what to do with it, and a lot of stigma that I felt around just kind of reaching out for support. And given just what a huge influence music had played in my life, it wasn't until I moved to New York City a couple years after that, kind of got my life together, got my MBA, and I thought, what amazing work musicians could do if we could start talking about mental health more. And this report came out, you probably saw it, Record Union said 73% of artists are reporting symptoms of anxiety and depression, which is a staggering statistic. But I kind of thought, hey, there's an opportunity there where these artists, they're starting to speak out more and more. And how can we leverage this and build a movement and a platform around it to bring resources to more people, to bring this conversation to more people so people feel comfortable reaching out for support.
This has kind of gotten pretty big pretty fast for him, hasn't it?
Yeah, I was like impressed. He does stuff on the East Coast, and he contacted me about the West Coast. He wanted to do one, and I kind of hooked him up with some friends at the Ventura Fairgrounds that were doing those drive-in shows. Next thing I know, he's doing a show in Ventura. He had All Time Low, and he had Fits of the Tantrums,
right,
amongst other artists. It's interesting. We struggle with this, but we're in a business, and he, especially when you're asking people to do something for charity, a lot of times you have to learn. We all learn that no. How do we deal with the word no?
I think I've struggled with that a lot in my own life. That the idea of, because I'm getting rejection, that there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with this idea, I'm a failure. And I think you just start to hear no enough times, and then you get a yes, and it's kind of a numbers game in a little bit of a sense. I remember, like, the presenting sponsors that we had for our first event, we ended up having HBO support us. And a lot of those sponsors, it was like literally like cold email after cold email, a lot of no, like, who are you? But then you get the one right person on the phone who, like I said, it's just kind of like believes in it, and you hear that validation on the other end. And then you get to do the event, or, in our case, it's an event, but in other people's case, it's whatever it is. I think I've learned a lot of lessons of, you just have to be true to yourself and what you believe in. And if it's worth fighting for, you keep going.
It's funny, even when I got no a lot. And even though you thought through it, like, this would be the best thing for this band, this is the best thing to be doing, and then you get a no, and you would just rack your brain going, but then I was usually right, so it didn't matter to me. In the long run, it would have been better if they if they hadn't said no and done what I asked them to do. But no, you do learn rejection in this business, and you learn how to absorb it. And those moments in time when you have, good results or a positive response,
it's euphoric. But him understanding that extremely interesting statistic of those people that are entertainers and artists and musicians and actors and all of that, they get to hear no a hell of a lot more than the average Joe. And I wonder if this nonprofit that he's associated with, a lot of that has to do with why there's some level of depression there. Well, it's learning how to deal with it, right?
Yeah, and but of course he was great. He He was very open. I had some of my students help out at his event on the West Coast. So, I'd love for him to tell us how to get involved, because he's very open to having college students, young people get involved in this project.
Go on our website, soundmindlive.org. We've got a contact page. If you want to volunteer, let us know there. If you're in the music community and an artist or just in the industry, please reach out to us to help support. And you can donate there too. We've got a donate page.
Soundmindlive.org. So if you're interested, go out and check it out. It's a great organization to get involved.
Now you're going on vacation, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I'm getting my first true summer vacation in 29 years. 23 3 Lollapaloozas, 25 Warp Tour, 1 pandemic summer, and now I'm going to do this.
Now you finally get vacation in summer.
Yeah, so before we go, and the next episode is going to be pretty rad. It's going to be Gary Tovar from Golden Voice.
Oh,
the legacy of Golden Voice.
The legend.
And, I'm picking up interviews with Paul Tollett. I'm picking up interviews with Greg Graffin. I got Fletcher jumping on. This is going to be quite an episode 13. So right now it's time to thanks to all our guests that came on today.
And thanks for all the listeners as well. We love reading the comments.
I love the comments. So make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok to get yourself an interview and be on the show.
And please subscribe to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to know when new episodes are released.
Also subscribe to our Patreon to get exclusive content and hear the full-length interviews with all our guests.
And text us. Let us know what topics you want to hear about. 818-863-6445.
I'd like to give a shout out to Caitlin Block for joining our Patreon, and also Grace Moran for joining our Patreon this week. Also, the good work you're doing with Rock the Dream, the nonprofit. Keep up the good work, Grace. See you down the road.
And once again, next episode, Gary Tovar.
Yeah, it's going to be cool.
It's awesome. You're one of my mentors. And thank you to Xavier Bradley.
Oh, that's right, that guy.
Vivian Wang. I hope she's still married by the time this episode airs.
I hope so.
And I hope that Beata Shiptov still has a job.
Yep.
But right now, it is time for our favorite person, because we know he's not going anywhere for a couple years at least. Diego Aradia.
Take it away, kid.